Welcome back. We're going to do a quick sphere in charcoal. This is hand-toned paper, so it's painted with a thin gray acrylic paint. We're going to start by very lightly drawing a circle. Leave enough room for the cast shadow, which is going off to the left. And again, use very light pressure with the graphite. How's my focus? Is it locked? That's better. So we're going to look at the direction of the light, which we determine by finding the points where the form shadow begins and ends. We've already done some of that, so notice that this angle is about 45 degrees. Again, this is a very faint line. Then we're going to draw a half ellipse, which dips down below that diameter slightly. And we're going to draw our light lines, which is going to be perpendicular to that 45 degree diagonal. So you can see the light is running roughly 45 degrees the other way. Hope that's clear. And you notice that the boundaries of the shadow on the ground are going to be contained within these light lines. We're also going to notice that the axis of the cast shadow is going about 10 degrees up as it moves to the left, and that's what we should expect because the light seems to be in front of the ball. In other words, the light is on our side of the ball, so we would expect the shadow to be pushing up to the space behind the ball. So we're going to end up with something like this. The thing I like about the hand-toned paper versus the paper that already has the color in it is this thin watered-down coat of flat acrylic wall paint. I use interior wall paint. Creates a tougher surface so that you can erase more freely without damaging the paper. So I'm going to erase my construction lines and just leave the shadow map and the ball like that. I am going to do my first shading right-handed since most of you are right-handed, and I'm going to just do a first shading with gray charcoal everywhere inside this shadow map. And I want you to notice that the charcoal on this kind of toothy surface makes a much darker mark than the graphite. And that's the idea here, is that we don't have to go back and erase our shadow map too much because it is going to be, the graphite's really, especially if we did it with a light pressure, it's not going to show too much. I am left-handed, so this is backwards for me, but assuming you're right-handed, this is the direction of your first shading. If you're left-handed, you'll go the other way. I neglected to draw the horizon here, or where the floor ends. So I'm going to do that right now. And then I'm going to do a very, very faint first shading with white. And again, I'm doing this right-handed. I'm not too worried about my edges yet. I'm just trying to lay in the tones. And I'm also going to do a first shading of white on the ground plane because I can notice that that's just a little bit lighter than the wall. But I'm going to really resist the temptation to push hard. We just want this to be very, very faint. Now, at this stage in the drawing, you should be able to see the forms well enough to make some corrections. And I'm always going to challenge you to make a few corrections at this stage, just because you'll notice that even though there's no detail at all yet, you can read the forms pretty clearly, and that gives your brain a lot of clues that you might have made an error or two. I'm just going to clean up some of my outlines, and I'm also going to maybe just bring this shadow down a little bit more, and I'm erasing my shadow map there where it looked a little too dark. So that's the only correction I'm going to make, but feel free to make more extensive corrections if you want. And I'm going to erase the light lines now, the construction lines on the photograph, and we're going to talk about second shading. So when we do second shading, this is the first time we're thinking about bringing out areas in the dark that are darker. And I'm going to start by bringing out this edge. And notice that I'm shading with the direction that this edge is moving because I want to sharpen that edge. I call these sharpening strokes. But I'm going to stop them right about here because here's where that cast shadow gets a lot lighter. And then instead of continuing with this direction, I'm trying to convey a sense that the floor plane is flat. So I'm going to switch right away into horizontal strokes like this. And here I'm going to do second shading with horizontal strokes, but I'm going to leave it very, very faint because I don't want to make this too much darker than it is. Notice that when I erased my shadow map, I opened up just a little bit of gray between the black and the white here. And I can always go back and open up a little bit more. The more gray there is in the middle, the more the softer that edge is going to look. I'm going to do a little bit of second shading on the ground plane in white. And notice that if we are consistent in shading direction between the shadows and the lights, it starts to look like one flat surface and not like two separate elements in the drawing. Now right here we get to a place in the background where it's really a lot lighter. It's lighter than the ball and it's a sharp edge. So here I'm going to use a few sharpening strokes to bring that edge out. Again, I'm making my pencil move with the curve there, but then I want to immediately transition back to the horizontal strokes. Now there's a principle in Gestalt psychology of object completion, and you've probably seen this before, but if you draw a little shape like this and a little shape like this and a little shape like this, your brain is actually going to mentally complete the little line segments that are missing until you almost feel like you're seeing them. And that's what's happening here. This boundary is very crisp and clear. This boundary is very crisp and clear. There's really no definition here, but your brain kind of fills it in. And there is a little bit of definition right at the beginning, so I can go a little darker right here. But I'm going to resist the temptation to make this a continuous line, because somewhere in the middle here the values are virtually the same, and I don't want to create a difference in my drawing that doesn't exist in the motif, the thing I'm looking at. So here I'm going to do some more sharpening strokes. And now when I shade along this shadow edge, as we practiced in graphite, I'm going to be starting with a curve going this way, and then as I move towards the middle, I'm going to be going pretty much the direction of the light, and then as I get all the way to the end, curving the other way.
Ping pong is canceled for today. Thank you.
Ping pong is canceled. I'm going to go just a little darker. This is called the core shadow, or the core of the form shadow. And as we've discussed, it gets darker through here than it is on the bottom, because down here is reflected light. And you'll notice that the darker I make my core shadow and my cast shadow here, the more the reflected light appears to pop out. Now, believe it or not, we are almost done. The same way I sharpen this edge, I need to do the same thing over here, especially right here where the background is really brighter than the ball. And so we're going to sharpen that. And then transition right away to those horizontal strokes. And we don't need our shading to go all the way to the edge of the paper. This is not a composition, this is a study. So we are just seeing if we have what it takes to draw this thing, and we're not worried about cropping it or working onto the edges. So this effect where you let the fading just sort of drift off towards the corners of the paper without going all the way there or cropping it is called vignetting, and that's an appropriate thing to do when you're doing a study. Now the last really sharp edge that we can see is this one, where the outside contour of the ball is much brighter than the background, which I left the same color as the paper. So I'm going to do some sharpening strokes all the way around here. And as I get down towards this area right here, I'm getting brighter and brighter. Because this plane right here is perpendicular to the light. Now that's not exactly the same as, that's called the middle light. It's not exactly the same as the highlight. The highlight is that little pop of reflection where it's the plane that is angled to reflect the light source, and that wanders depending on where your eye is. So the highlight is right about here. It's near the middle light, but it's not exactly in the center of it. And that's about it for a sphere study on charcoal. So I don't like to smudge these drawings, but if you need to make a correction, or if you need to just even something out, you can press a kneaded eraser down over the area. Notice I'm not moving the eraser back and forth, I'm just pushing it down. And now that I kind of backed off on my value, I can go back in and even that out again, but without smudging it at all. And the idea along this edge is that we are reaching towards that gray zone. Notice each stroke I'm placing the pencil down onto the paper while it's in the light area, and I'm releasing it into the gray area. And I want you to do the same thing. Every stroke starts out in the light and releases into the gray. And I want you to think about this like two sets of lines, like fingers that are reaching towards each other, but they're not touching. We never want to have the black and the white interlock. And I'll show you why in a second. And here I'm doing the black towards the gray, but we're never touching them. It's critically important. It's the same principle that when we're painting and underpainting, we don't want to start mixing the raw umber and the white. We want to keep them separate. And while you're finishing your drawings, what we see right here is a secondary shadow within the large shadow. There's some reflected light bouncing off the back wall. So that's casting a shadow within this shadow area, because this reflected light off the wall is filling this part of the shadow, but not this part. And here I'm bringing my black and white they're almost touching, because
Bodie Holland, if you're still in the building, please come to room 228. Bodie Holland, please come to room 228. Thank you.
This shadow right here is relatively sharp. Can you see that? It's not super sharp like this, but it's a lot sharper than it gets out here. And that's because the further an object gets, the further the shadow gets from the object, the more fuzzy that shadow edge is going to get. And out here, it's just, again, I'm shading from the dark into the gray zone, and then I can shade back again the other way with white towards the gray. And that's how we create that control of the sharpness of the edges. There's really only two criteria for success in this kind of drawing. One is getting the right value in the right place, and the other one is to get the right amount of softness in your transition, softness or hardness. So right here, for example, we've got a very hard transition from black to white, so we're going to bring them right up next to each other like this, and along the soft edges we're going towards but not touching like that. I just want to show you for your own knowledge what happens when you do mix the black and the white. I'm going to slide this up a little bit and just show you, if I want to do a value scale from black to white, the way I'm teaching you, if a gradual transition, we would do it like this. We would do black going off to the left, and here's my white going off to the right, and there's that object completion idea. It looks like I shaded the whole thing because we have such a nice transition there, but I didn't even touch this middle section at all. It's total illusion. The idea with using gray paper is to save yourself a lot of work, so make it look easy and the drawing will be more beautiful and graceful and people will like to look at it more. Now look what happens if I do it the other way. I can do the same thing, but I can blend my black and my white, and what you're going to see is the emergence of a separate kind of gray. And I just took something that up here looks really, it's a better fade and it took less time and it looks kind of beautiful, and here I'm taking more time and I'm having a harder time getting the fade, and it looks kind of ugly because now I have this mixed gray where the black and white pigments are mixing together, and it's kind of competing with the gray of the paper because it's not exactly the same gray. It's very close. If I zoom in on it a little, I think you'll be able to see better that it's just a whole different effect and not as pleasing. We don't want to make it look like we're trying really hard when we draw. Nobody likes to see that any more than they like to see a dancer on stage like huffing and puffing and sweating all over the audience. You want to make it look easy, and the way to do that is to find strategies that make it easier. So that's our goal here. Okay, thank you again for watching, and that'll be the end of this recording.